I'm Andrew. I've been learning PyTorch lately, and I face two challenges quite often. Now, the first one is when I'm trying to do dataset loading. What I've often found myself is that I would keep printing out like the shapes and try to find out what is happening underneath, and that takes quite a bit of time. And I found a way to make it quicker. And the other thing when I'm trying to do tensor multiplication, oftentimes, you're in high dimension, you have batch sizes, and you have like labels and like shapes and all those things, and you're doing squeezing, unsqueezing, transpose. Oftentimes you'll find yourself being quite lost in the dimensions. So I found a way to actually help us stare into the dimensions and make sure that the dimensions actually match. So as an engineer, what we often use a lot is debugging. And I found that you can actually use debugging in PyTorch as well. So I'm using VSCode, and this is just a simple example, right? And there's a feature here called run and debug, okay? When you run and debug, you could just press Python file, and that will allow you to debug your file, okay? So the feature here that you could run is called run line by line, okay? Or run by line, which is equivalent to F10. So when I press this, what actually happens now is that this thing pops up. In essence, this is the call stack, which is like what is actually happening in the code right now. These are variables that is happening in the code, and you could watch certain variables later. So for an example, if I want to see the image.shape, or I could want to see train set, all these things actually allow me to do that. So I'll be staring at it, and it'll update as the code registers in this line by line. So now what you can actually do is you could press this button, or the shortcut is F10, and what actually happens now is that you would be jumping into the code line by line, right? You'll be stepping into it, and that's the formal language. Now the superpower that it allows you for dataset debugging is instead of printing out train set and what classes it has, what labels it has, you can now actually hover over it and actually be able to see all the classes that the dataset has. So for an example here, now I can see that this dataset has 10 classifications. I could also see the indices that they register to. I could look at the data and just kind of see what the shapes look like. So just jump into it, hover over it, and probably it'll tell you give you a hint of the tensor as well. You'll probably be able to see whether it's on GPU or CPU, and just all sorts of different things like the labels, where the data set is located, right? So all this is very helpful because you no longer have to print things. The second thing that is very helpful is tensor multiplication. So previously, if I didn't have these two lines, I would get an error. I would copy paste, put it into ChatGPT, and then try to fix it line by line. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But also the worst thing is if it works, but your math is actually wrong, just somehow the dimensions match, that would be a worst case scenario because your whole model would not work, but you wouldn't know why. So what you could actually do is you could actually stare at x.shape and look at y.shape. And right now there are numbers because I ran it last time, it should be empty. So then now I could continue running. F10, 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 F10. You could see that immediately it updates x.shape because I just finished running this. And equivalently, you would expect this to change after I finish running this as well. F10, F10, F10. You see? And now, if I just multiply by the batch size just to simulate what real life batch size training is like. Now you would know this is what's happening under x.shape, and I want to transpose it just to make sure that it's a correct sort of matrix multiplication. You will now transpose, you will unsqueeze, and now we know that this matrix multiplication works because it's 20 by 3 times 3 by 20. And when I move forward, it actually makes sense. And I could even stare at z.shape as well, which is the correct multiplication in this example. And so that actually helps. So instead of printing x.shape, y.shape, z.shape, and then scratching your head and trying to figure out what's happening, you could just use the debugger, which I found very helpful. I hope this video helps, and hope to hear your feedback. Thanks.